Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Geopolitics with Tyberius D. It was once the cradle of Western civilization. It has now been eclipsed in time. Today we're going to be talking about Greece. All right, everyone. For anyone who is watching the recording of this, I do apologize for being late on Twitch. Good 2 hours. I was tired. I needed a break. I'm kind of thinking about what I'm going to do with my streaming schedule because Twitch is the most rewarding. If you are watching this or listening to this, is that I have the most money, the most activity, the most income through Twitch, and I want to cater to that a little bit more. But it's just one of those deals to where if I stream later on, I'm going against a bunch of other content. And sometimes it's so late that I just like, hey, I want to sleep now, or I want to get it done with so I can like go to bed or whatever. But sometimes I just come home and I lay down for a minute and I just pass out. And it's just, I'm kind of damned if I do, damned if I don't. But anyway, as far as what we're doing here, I want to thank everyone for being here, whether you're in the chat, whether you are watching the show. And then if you are listening on the podcast or if you're watching this on YouTube, I do appreciate you for being there after the fact. Feel free to leave a comment. Let us know what you think. You can always contact me if you're listening to the podcast on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. It's easy to get a hold of me. Absolutely do that. Okay, without further ado, let's just make sure that we've got this, and that is... Geopolitics with Tyberius D is brought to you by Fallen Or, Andy Wagner, The West Dude, Julia, Drew, and Samantha. We appreciate everything that you guys do for us. And let's talk about some Greece. Yes, Seabury, you can do that. You can do that. It helps my viewer numbers. Better than nothing. Just make sure that you have the tab muted and not the actual excuse me. What is it? You have to have the tab muted and not the actual music or the sound on that particular player. It won't count. All right. Without further ado, let's talk about Greece. Greece is kind of seen as the start of Western civilization. Is that true? Yes and no. It has a lot of influence throughout time. A lot of the alphabet currently is, derived from the expansion of the Greek alphabet. You'll notice that A, B, kind of look very, very similar. And that is, kind of it. But what's going on in Greece right now is it's going to crap. It's been in recession since 2008. It's lost about 40% of its economy. It's kind of ridiculous. I need to go into some technical details on that at some point, but I just hadn't had time to really get into my data sets. And by the time I actually do it right now, it'll be time to update them. The updates come out in July. So I really need to actually hunker down whenever that happens. I might take some time off or just do that on the stream or something. But Greece has been in trouble for a long time. Yes, you are right, Seabury. We'll get to that here in a minute. So what's going on in the events? I got a friend over there. Well, associate maybe? We don't really like each other. But he's a good friend's girlfriend. Or she is a good friend's girlfriend, and she's studying abroad, and it's quite interesting because they've been in COVID lockdown, and she's not had any chance to get out while studying abroad, so it's interesting. But it's full of crises. It's got a financial crisis. They're still having trouble balancing their books. They have a debt crisis. They're over leveraged up to the gills, and they don't really have any ways of getting out of it. Their economy has been in free fall forever, or for over 10 years now. It's technically classifies as a depression. It's just their economy went offline, or is not offline, but their economy has just been contracting because this is a system that doesn't really generate capital. We'll talk about that in the geography section. And it just doesn't really have a role to play. It really doesn't really meet the qualifications for a nation state to a large degree. So let's get into that. Why is this such a why is this such a mess? All right. Well, the general level here is that it's going to come into resources and the topography, but we'll start with the climate. Climate's relatively nice. It's part of that whole part of the whole Mediterranean belt that is, pretty decent weather. Keeps pretty consistent. However, they're definitely more in that rain shadow that Sicily and southern Spain is part of, although they do pick up some water from the Mediterranean. The problem is that Greece is largely mountainous, and so like the western part squeezes it. So by the time it gets to the eastern part, sometimes it's lacking in rain. Not always, but sometimes. And so at least for the general climate, it's nice. It's humid. It's not hell. It's not central Turkey, but it's pretty. It's not the best in the world. You want to go a little bit more north into the Balkans. Actually, are better as far as the climate. It's a lot more temperate. It's a lot more controlled. But you do have the ocean that kind of keeps your climate control on pretty well there. So it's never really stupidly hot or stupidly cold. But what it is generally is that it's kind of dry for where it is. So we'll get off of that one. Topography. This is the problem with Greece. Greece is nothing but mountains, just absolutely loaded with mountains. And it generates a lot of passes. It generates a lot of operable areas where you just can't interact with each other. I've got quite a few games that I like to play, particularly those that get more detailed. You realize very quickly that if it's modeled on any kind of aerial accuracy, there's a bunch of mountain ranges and mountain passes that are basically strategic buffers that made the city-state era that we remember in Greece so fondly, or at least most of us in Western society. Athens, Sparta, Thebes, all this. This is the geography that facilitates city-states. Is that you got a little enclave here, then you got a little enclave here, and you got a little enclave here. But it's really hard to build out into a given whole. Either one, you have to just load out the entire area with infrastructure, highways, railroads, everything, and there's only one way it can go, through those passes. Because digging through those mountains is a nightmare, even in the industrial era. These are big mountains, and it's tectonically active. There's earthquakes and all kinds of crap here. It's not easy to build a flourishing nation-state civilization here. So the question is, when we get to history, and remind me, chat, about this, is why does this happen? Why is it that this is the cradle of civilization for Western Europe? Why is this the place that gets democracy? Why is this the place? Why is this that is the area that will eventually defeat Persia, right? With Alexander. Huge concept. Make sure I make sure I hit that. But yeah, just on a general level, the topography is kind of crap. It's very mountainous. It's very hilly. It's very rugged, and there's only very little places where you can put together a city or a state. And so yeah, let's not hang up on that too much. As far as resources, they don't really have much. Everything, this is a place that's been industrially active for almost 3,000 years. If you get down to it, mining, resource extraction, that kind of thing. Everything's largely been taken out, and even before that, it wasn't a lot to take anyway. I mean, there's some silver mines that you used to have, gold, a lot of the things that make antiquity work, tin, copper, that kind of thing, but particularly not in what we would think of as the modern nation states. Coal, oil, forget it. It's not there. And so it has a hard time fitting into the industrial era, unlike some other players in the region and the scene. I'm sorry, my nose is itching like crazy. I don't know why. It's absolutely driving me nuts. But you'll notice that happens from time to time. Just start scratching my nose, and I can't stop. So anyway, as far as its borders, though, it's weird. It's internally secure because literally you just have so many fallback lines that if somebody comes to attack you, as long as they are not able to leverage into you with a navy, you're usually pretty good. And so the Italians back in 1940 tried to invade Greece, and they got their butts kicked. Now, granted, Italy didn't perform all that well, but it took the full might of Germany to kind of come in and clean out Greece, and it basically takes quite a bit of overpower to be able to punctuate that geography because it's very insular. The problem with that is that domestically it's hard to connect, which we already talked about, but even as a foreign invader, it's kind of hard to invade. And even when somebody does invade it and take it over, the Turks, Macedonians, whoever the hell else, the Romans, it's hard to rule because you have the same problem of governorship there as as they have amongst themselves. And so it basically requires, to some degree, a capital pour in to fix. There's a big notice here, and we'll get that to history. But as far as its borders, it's okay. The northern border really kind of sucks. You kind of want to pull it back about 60 miles to where you get into the area of Thessaly. That's a lot more secure. It's a lot easier to deal with. But Greece really wanted southern Macedonia, and I can't remember what they call this area now. It's it used to be Thrace, is what it used to be known as, and that was the region around the Constantinople, and that goes. The Bulgarians had it for a quick while. It's just that split off over there on the side off that borders the Turks. Yeah, that area, you can have it, but you really don't want it if you want to have a secure geography. So let's get into its history. Its territorial expansion. Modern Greece is only 150 years old. It's largely kind of eked out of the collapsing Ottoman Empire by the British in the 1830s, 1820s, 1830s, something like that. The British just basically make it a protectorate. They let it get independence, and they tell the Ottomans to screw off for its war. And that's the modern nation of Greece in a nutshell. It's this kind of eclipsed thing that has been guaranteed by a foreign sponsor ever since its independence. It was, for a long time, it was sponsored by the British. When the British can no longer do it because the empire is gone, it's largely a puppet state of the Americans. And now it's just kind of a puppet state of the Germans. Greece doesn't really work without a sponsor. But people are going to ask, how did we get from here, where it's just basically somebody's begging toy, versus, cradle of civilization? Two things. One, the Sea of Marmara, which we talk a lot about in the Turkish episode, and even somewhat in the Italian episode, is that it is no longer serving the capital generating role that it used to have. I'm sorry, not the Sea of Marmara. It's the Aegean Sea. I don't remember what even the Sea of Marmara is. Sorry about that. I completely forgot. Oh yeah. The Sea of Marmara is the one in the Bosphorus, which actually is true. This is part of that system. But the Aegean Sea, if you look at it, and actually, you know what? I might just fire up this thing on the stream if you guys are willing to look at it. Give me just a second here. I'm gonna use the visual aid for once, right? For once, we're gonna do it. All right, and then I think I need to hit this button. No. Oh no, that's not what we wanted. There we go. Okay, so we're looking at Greece now. This whole area that Greece kind of surrounds, in combination with Turkey, is the Aegean Sea, right? And if anyone can't see this, is that basically the entire eastern Greek coastline of Thessalonica and Greece itself, which is the area I was talking about earlier, and then the western half of Turkey, all borders what is known as the Aegean Sea. And actually kind of makes this really nice insular bubble with Rhodes and Crete, and then all the way up into the Peloponnese, or the Isthmus of Peloponnesia. This is a giant aquatic highway. It's not perfect. It's not like a river system where storms, don't churn up giant waves. But what it is that any part of this, even in antiquity, is largely within a day's sail. So you can pick up in Athens, get up, and then go over to what used to be like Sardis, which is now Izmir, and all this other things. And you can literally just use it as a giant water highway. That's still real. You can still do that. But what the problem here is that the problem, the problem with this on a general level is that the mass majority of traffic that used to go through this region because of like the Silk Road and Eurasian trade routes. They fell apart. And that's part of the whole deep water navigation part that we've talked about so many times. Excuse me. Is that basically with the 1600s and particularly even into the 1700s, is that you have the Dutch East India Company, the British East India Company, that kind of thing, who goes out to India, picks up all the spices, picks up all the China, the silk, all that things that are on the Silk Road, and reroutes it by sea. It goes a lot faster, and they don't have to empower their enemies, which is like the Ottomans, which ruled this area at the time. And so Greece hasn't been able to generate capital in the same way that it used to. One, because the Turks have taken the entire eastern half of the Aegean. So they don't even have the full capability of having that unified entity. The Greeks had it for a quick second, but it was insulated in the fact that the Greek cities in Macedonia, it took Macedonia to put it all together. And then it took the Romans to put it back together. Greece never really kept itself together very long. So keeping that as a unified entity that actually generates mutually sustaining capital, one, it's not fully on board right now anyway. But even if it was, is that it would still have a hard time because you still need, larger ocean-going ships because it's a blue. Technically it's green water. It's not blue, but the problem with it is that it's quite a stormy and dangerous navigational place. A lot of these areas are like mountainous rock, volcanoes, that kind of thing. They just kind of jut out of the ocean, so you kind of have to know where you're going. And so the whole general point here is that when there was goods and spices and all these things coming off the Silk Road into Constantinople, among other places, this place generated a crap ton of capital. It basically was a sound hole that we see a lot in throughout history, and it facilitated a crap ton of trade. But particularly after the Silk Road is over, with deep sea navigation, it just falls apart. It doesn't work anymore at generating capital. It largely requires more capital from the outside to come in and sponsor this region than it generates itself. And this has been to the detriment of the Greeks and the Turks in a particularly large manner, is that they can no longer be the powers that they used to be. Technology did supplant them in a geopolitical sense. Is that no longer do you need to have those land trade routes? You can just do everything by the water. And one of the most insulting things for Greece is the Suez Canal. One, it actually brought the trade routes closer, but no one really stops in Greece because these giant cargo ships, if you just need to go to Greece, you go to Greece. But if you need to go to Italy, you just go to Italy. You go to Spain. You go all the way up into Rotterdam, which is the big one. And it's largely bypassed. It's not because everything's not within a day's sail, and because you're not going to put everything on the back of camels. Greece is largely just supplanted. It is more cost beneficial to put everything on a giant boat, ship it all the way around the Horn of freaking Africa, than go through Greece and Europe and all that. And that's that whole balance of transport thing that Zion talks about. I've talked about it a lot in numerous episodes. Is that generating wealth and also the use of wealth is really, really important in how you use transportation. And so Greece is screwed. But let's talk a little bit about the history. So we'll talk about a few significant events. You have the rise of the early Greeks. We don't know a hell of a lot about them because largely they're wiped out by the Bronze Age collapse. We know they're a thing to some degree during the time of the Hittites and the time of the Egyptians, that kind of thing. I believe this is the Middle Kingdom, or the Middle Era for Egypt. But you have the Hittites, you would have Assyria and Babylon, all this stuff, which is a little earlier. Excuse me. But we know that the Greeks are actually a people. We have their archaeology. There's pottery going back literally to like 1000 BC. They're part of the Bronze Age collapse that happens. It looks like they were really just starting to get going to join like the major powers list or they could have been. But the Bronze Age collapse happens, and that pretty much wipes everybody off the radar for a quick minute. And so civilization has to reset. The good news is that we start really seeing that, particularly in the 800s and 700s BC, after the collapses happened, to where they are the ones that kind of pick up the pieces the quickest. Part of that's technological diffusion that comes from the Levant, the Holy Crescent, that kind of thing. is that this region permeates all their technology and it goes to Greece. You have a society formed, and the reason to come full circle with this, that Greece is kind of the birthplace of Western civilization, even though it's a little bit of a misnomer, is that Greece is like a petri dish because of its geography. You have Sparta, which is incredibly autocratic to a large degree. It has a weird citizenship policies. You have Athens, which is like something we would kind of associate more with a modern democracy, or at least a noble republic. And then you have all these other ones. Thebes, you have... I'm drawing blanks here. I apologize. You have the Anatolian League. You have the Aegean League. You have all these other groups of peoples that are able to come together and just try different things. And you literally have a petri dish of literally 1,000 city-states that are all trying to figure out what works best. And eventually, after a lot of trial and error, and then particularly some pretty significant wars, at least in Greek history, they'll eventually get kind of put all together. You kind of actually have this weird Greek nationalism that kind of forms as a response to the Persians. So let's talk about that crap. Greece is trying to put itself together. It largely between 800 and 700 really kind of gets started BC, but it really just doesn't. No one really gets an upper hand on each other. One, because you have a society that doesn't really want to go full out and actually have total war. This is why you have the Olympics. They'll literally stop in the middle of a war and a battle. They'll all head down to wherever the Olympics are being hosted, and they'll, compete in all their naked, glorious glory. Wow, I have a way with words, I tell you. They go about that. They're doing their thing, but they don't really invest in the point of, oh, we're going to win. And so there's a lot of this back and forth, hey, pay me this year. Oh, wait, you beat me, pay, or I beat you this time, pay you. It just doesn't work out very well for United Greece because they don't do it. And the thing that actually kind of starts putting this all together as an identity is that you have these people called the Persians show up. Now you have, in like 535 BC, you have a guy named Darius who largely kind of comes up and builds out the Persian Empire, starts conquering everything in their whole region. Particularly goes into Mesopotamia and everything to the west of Persia, not towards the east. And by the way, it's not like the reason we call it Persia is it's a misnomer. They've always kind of called themselves the Aryans. So weird. Iran's actually their real name, just to let you know. But yeah, so the Persians go out and they'll go all the way into Egypt. They'll go all the way into what we call Turkey. Or Asia Minor, and then eventually they say, no, we're gonna conquer Greece, and this is not Darius. It is there's two of them. The first one is the Battle of Marathon. He ends up dying, and then his son takes over, and I can't remember either of their names right now. But one of them's Xerxes is the son. Xerxes is the one that has the Battle of Thermopylae and the 300. That whole thing. I'm so sorry. Give me just a second. My nose is absolutely going to drive me freaking insane. Oh my gosh. Why is my nose so itchy? All right. So let's roll it back. You have the Persians are kind of go in, and what happens is they take the Asia Minor, Turkey, which is Greek at the time, or at least the coastlines are. This is the Mausoleum of Helicanarchus, that whole things. And yeah, what happens is, as a whole here on a general level, is that the Persians are expanding their empire like all good empires do. And you'd say, all right, we're going to conquer everybody. We're going to put them under our heel or our thumb. And, it's for the glory and God of country, right? They come into Turkey. And the Athenians in particular will sponsor insurrectionist movements in what is the Greek part of Asia Minor because they don't want the Persians ruling it. One of them turns into a full-on rebellion or revolt. The Persians crush it. And I believe this is at Sardis. The Persians are pissed. And so they pretty much vow they're going to wipe Greece off of the map. Just solely for this one incident. Because it offends the plurality of the motherland, right? It's just, no, you bow before Persians, you don't insurrect. The first invasion is where the entire Persian fleet gets an army together, and they drop them off About 40 miles up from Athens at a place called Marathon. Sorry if I don't have the distance right. But anyway, not terribly far from Athens. You have a guy who, you have the Persians just show up with their fleet. They drop off an army. But the Greeks, which do start coalitioning at this point, is that the Greeks kind of recognize they have a greater enemy than themselves. And you have particularly Athens kind of spearheading this at the start, but you'll have a coalition get together, and they actually stop them at the beaches. While they're unloading, the Greek army shows up. The Greek army charges, and they just push them back into the sea because they don't even have their cavalry off the boats yet. This is the Battle of Marathon. And actually, as an interesting aside story, there is a guy who is dispatched to run from Marathon to Athens. This is why it's actually called a marathon. From Marathon to Athens, goes all the way, runs, goes into the halls of chamber, screams Nike, and dies. Nike being the Greek word for victory. That's 2 stories all in one shot. You're welcome. This is how we get the term marathon. This is how we get the term Nike that's on your shoes. Well, not my shoes, but if you have that company, that's where it comes from. It actually means victory. And it's from a runner who literally died. So yeah, a nice little piece of history for you. Anyway, so that happens. The Persians have to put their crap back in order because this is a massive humiliation. And actually started making the empire get a little flamey. And of course, the dad eventually dies. And because of that, Xerxes has to spend quite a bit of time trying to put everything back together before he can go after Greece a second time. The second time will eventually lead to Thermopylae. This is where they cross the Hellespont. This is where they invade Greece. And there's really 4 battles that mean something here. One of the early ones is Thermopylae, where they just slow them down. And they kind of show, or like the Spartans. By the way, it's 300 Spartans, and there's like 1,000 Thessalians or Thebians or somebody else stays. I can't remember exactly who it is. But it's actually the last stand of the 1,300, and they'll stick around, and they'll all be slaughtered, but they really kind of show everybody. The Persians might have massive numbers, but they have literally no discipline. They are a mob, and they absolutely get whooped. There's some battles on and off here, there, and they're not historically accurate, but the 300 movies do kind of highlight the history here, particularly the end where you see the Spartans charging at the end of the first movie. That is the Battle of Plataea, and he actually says that. That is where the Greeks absolutely stomp the Persians in an all-out knockdown, drag-out fight. You pretty much have the United Coalition of Greece and the entirety of the Persian army and whoever they've gotten to defect on their side, and they have it out. And the Greeks, through all of their differences, pull together and absolutely beat the living crap out of the Persians. Persians have to retreat. And they do. There's not much left for them to retreat with. That's how bad they get beaten. But yeah, they pull back, and the Greeks kind of have to figure out how they're going to have to deal with this themselves. And what you have is 2 power camps that kind of form between Athens and Sparta. And so everyone either starts paying homage to the Athenians and say, this is our boss, and we kind of take charge from the Athenians, or vice versa with the Spartans. And you have what's called the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War is basically the struggle to control all of Greece. And if you don't know your history here, Sparta will win this. Sparta will not come to dominate all Greece, but they'll be kind of the hegemon of Greece. They'll be in charge for a quick minute. The problem for the Spartans is that this doesn't last very long, because it's really hard for them to put this whole thing together. The Persians are still off to the wayside, and they still have the Greek control of Asia Minor, control of the Greek Asia Minor, and then you got some people up to the north. And these people up to the north are semi-Greek. They're not full Greek. They're called Macedonians. And you have a guy named Philip II who becomes king. And he figures out how to galvanize his people into a whole... He figures out how to galvanize his people into a whole... basically a unified entity. And then he takes what he can learn from anybody and everybody around and turns it into... a professional fighting force. They adopt the phalanx, they do all this other stuff, and they're really strong. And also Philip's a pretty damn decent leader. He comes in and conquers Greece, literally just rolls through, and defeats them all by one by one. And the difference between what the Spartans are able to do versus the Macedonians is the Macedonians are strong enough and powerful enough. They put everyone under their aegis. They rule them. They rule Greece. What happens is that Philip dies, and his son, you may be familiar with his son, at 13 years old, ascends to the throne. And no one believes that a 13-year-old can rule this, great empire, right? And so everyone goes their own way, particularly almost every Greek city rebels, and they say, no, we're independent. Philip's gone, screw off, kid. This kid's name is Alexander. This is Alexander the Great. He'll say, screw that. And he demonstrates his competency. At 13 years of age, he goes back into Greece, and by 16, he's put it all back together. But, it takes him a while, but this is where he cut his teeth. This is why when he goes into Persia, he absolutely floors them. He's got 3 years of hardened battle experience against people that were trying to rebel from him in the first flight. He cuts his teeth and puts this thing all together. He's like, you know what? I'm competent. I'm capable. And he's got some pretty good generals, too. Let's not completely jump over them. You have Ptolemy, you have Seleucid, you have all of these people that really make this happen for him. He's got not only himself, he's not bad. Alexander the Great is not a bad ruler by any stretch of the imagination. He's a little vain, but hey, whatever. But you have a lot of these people that will help him. A very good cadre of people, all educated by incredibly intelligent people, largely Aristotle. Literally, Aristotle teaches Alexander and his friends growing up. So this is no joke at any point. Like, this is like the culmination of history where greatness is achieved. Alexander puts it all together, and then he's like, all right, we're gonna conquer Persia, which is ridiculous. The Persian Empire is massive. Greece is literally about the size that it is today at this point, maybe a little bigger with Macedonia up and being part of this. But you're going against the superpower of its day. And Alexander is just like, I'm going to do it. And he does. Systematically destroys the Persian Empire across the board. From Asia Minor, it goes down through the Levant, down into Egypt. You may notice a city called Alexandria. There's about 23 of them, actually, when it's all said and done. But there's one of them in Egypt that gets really, really strong. Actually becomes the capital for Ptolemy for a while, or for the Ptolemies. Anyway, so completely goes through, beats Darius the Third or Darius the Third. Can't remember exactly what his name is, but completely floors him, dominates that conversation, goes all the way into the Hindu Kush, conquers the entire thing, and says, "No, I'm going to go further." Tries to go into India. His army actually says, no, we're done. We're literally so far from home, it's ridiculous. And he starts making his way back home. He gets about halfway there, and it's highly suspected that he's poisoned. The empire falls apart. He has an heir. I think he has like a 1-year-old son. But unfortunately, at that age, there's no real ability to pass that off without a regent. There's a whole bunch of like memes and false history about it. Like somebody said that, hey, who's actually supposed to replace you, and the strongest or some nonsense like that. No, it's just his heir is not old enough to really inherit. Alexander dies at like 33. It's ridiculous. And the generals kind of start aching for power, and they'll basically make the successor kingdoms, which is what you have Ptolemy that forms what they call the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. You have Seleucid, which tries to put it all back together in a big way. And he'll control most of it. He'll control most of what was Persia and Babylon, Mesopotamia, and to some degree, like the Holy Crescent and the Levant. He'll control almost all of that. You'll have another guy, I can't remember, Antigonus, something like that. I might be confusing. No, Antigonus Seleucid is the same guy. Sorry. You have somebody take over in Macedonia and actually reforms a united Macedon. You'll have the Greek city-states rebel again, and Macedon will try to retake it, but without Alexander, it just doesn't work. And so, yeah, it's a mess. And then the history here is that eventually you have these people called the Romans show up. And just to show you how powerful the Romans are getting at this point, they're fighting Carthage and Hannibal at the same time that they start working into Greece. It also is made worse by the fact that Macedonia and Carthage actually allied during this time, during the Second Punic War, and tried to contain Rome. And while Hannibal absolutely will stomp the Romans, everybody else gets stomped by the Romans. Macedon will have 4 wars with the Romans. They'll absolutely get the crap kicked out of them the entire time. And it largely is the fact that the Roman maniple during the late Republic is actually invented as a hard counter, or not invented. It's kind of generated as a hard counter for the Samnites, because you had to be a lot more mobile in the hills of Lower Italy, but it's really effective against the phalanx, which is the usual Greek way of fighting. The Romans actually used the phalanx for a long time, but the Romans literally kind of evolved past it. They need something a lot more flexible, a lot more mobile, because the phalanx is not. And with that new tactic, if you will, this new unit of organization with the maniple, they will absolutely crush the Greeks. Whether it be Macedon, the Greek cities, they'll roll through. And in the same time that they're wiping Carthage off the map, they're in the process of wiping out Greece off the map. They're doing it at the same time. History's cool, and a little scary sometimes. The Romans, a lot of history focuses on the Punic War and how it's just this give and fight struggle between particularly Scipio and Hannibal towards the late age of that war. But what history tends to leave out is that the Romans are fighting Greece at the exact same time with their own legions and everything. This is how powerful they're getting at this point. And they'll literally take them both on. And while, Hannibal and the Carthage, particularly in the Second Punic War, will give them a bloody nose, the Greeks are just raffle stomped. It's not even close. And so that's kind of your history for you, is that Greece is largely occupied by the Romans, or just becomes part of it, and then unironically becomes its own successor kingdom called the Byzantine Empire in history. They consider themselves Roman, but it was predominantly a Greek-run empire. The emperor spoke Greek. Their people spoke Greek. And they were slowly just whittled down by attrition. A lot of this was the collapse of civic codes. The Byzantine Empire is kind of like the second coming of Greece. And this is Greece really at its height, is that they think of themselves as Roman, but they're not. It's actually a Greek-run empire. It largely controls Dalmatia, which is largely the Balkans now, in Illyria. It will control Greece itself. It'll control Turkey. It'll, for a while there, control down into Egypt, but it's slowly withered away. And the biggest thing that happens to this is something called the rise of Islam. And the caliphates, is that the Muslim hordes, and I use that a little colloquially, but I hope you guys know what I mean. The populations of Arabia and then the Holy Lands is largely put together. They're largely put together by a religion, and they become the caliphates. And it's basically the holy war to expand the faith and the religion. And it slowly whittles down the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines have some serious problems after Justinian holding the empire together, because they actually tried to remake Rome. Officially, they actually took back Rome under Justinian. But the problem is that Italy was really hard to continue to occupy, and they literally just have to kind of pull back after a generation. You have the Germanic, like the Goths and all these other folks that are in Central Europe. They'll be pushing the Byzantines back. The Huns play a part of this as well, although this is a little bit after those. You'll have, for a while there, you'll have the Seljuks, or not the Seljuk, the Sassanids. You'll have the Sassanid Persians, and then as soon as the Sassanids are gone, they're literally conquered by the Caliphate, and the Caliphate uses all those resources to push back, half of which was former Roman territory or former Byzantine territory, particularly Egypt, particularly the Levant, and they'll slowly just get worked back after decade, century after century, to where the caliphate, whether it be the Sultan of Rum, the Ottomans, that kind of thing, they'll eventually get into Asia Minor and they'll conquer most of it to where Byzantium is what we think of as modern Greece. They will eventually be conquered by a successor state of their own, and that is the Seljuk or Turks turn into the Ottomans. There's a lot of people that are Turkic in this region at this point. This is around the late 1200s. One of them literally calls themselves the successor to Rome. They call themselves the Sultan of Rome, but they're not the ones that'll get it. Very unfortunate. It's a little kingdom that we'll know eventually as the Ottoman Empire. They'll grow. They'll start taking over Asia Minor, and they'll actually get around Byzantium and start taking their lands around Byzantium, but they can't take the city itself for a long time. Sooner or later, they get these ginormous cannons, because this is the age where gunpowder started becoming a thing. This is in the 1400s now. They wipe out Byzantium, or the Constantinople is what it is. And they conquer it. And they basically, after that point, are able to put this entity into a cohesive force that controls the entire Aegean Sea very, very quickly. And they get supercharged because they're in the state of power, they're in the ascendant, and it's just kind of building success upon success to where 100 years later, after they conquer Constantinople, it's actually more like 150. I think it's like 130. I'm sorry, it's like 120. 120 years later, they're at the gates of Vienna. Like, this is incredibly quick growth for what we would think of as an empire. They do very well for themselves. And from that point on, Greece is an Ottoman puppet all the way up until the 1800s, when the British actually wrench Greece from the dying corpse of the Ottomans. And that actually brings us back to the full history that we actually were talking about quite a bit earlier. So yeah, we've gone full circle. And actually, I think that's a good point where we're going to kind of end off at. So if you guys have a quick question, feel free to chat before I do the outros. But yeah, we're at 42 minutes. Not a bad episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope I didn't sound like I didn't know what I was talking about. I know some people say I don't. And I'm sorry I make vast generalizations, but we're still working a bit on the flow and the form, because there's a lot of people that are asking for like very specific things. And I think there is going to be a special here coming out where we're going to start doing events in geopolitics, like World War I, World War II, the Peloponnesian War, stuff like that. Things that radically change the geopolitical structure within the world itself. And so we'll definitely be wanting to talk about that. But yeah, that's Greece in a nutshell. Feel free to contact me different ways. I need to change up my Twitter tag. It's actually Tiberius_D. I got that fixed. Sometimes it doesn't always work. I apologize. Trying to work with that with my graphics editor. She's been very busy lately. So without further ado, yeah, I think that's been it. Feel free to check out my other content. If you want something a little bit more wholesome, you want to sit back and kind of listen to guys just chit chat about stuff, feel free to look up the podcast, the Mask Off podcast, or find my other YouTube channel. There's links down below, whether you're on Twitch, whether you are on YouTube. Yeah, definitely just look down below, Mask Off YouTube channel, Mask Off podcast. You can find something that's a lot more interviewee, a lot more like, hey man, how you doing? Good to see you. I'm just chatting with folks. If you like something a little bit more wholesome like that, be free to check that out. It's actually rapidly gaining in popularity, and it's probably going to eclipse geopolitics very quickly. It's just a lot less, what's the word here? It's a lot less technical and a lot more nuanced, or a lot more wholesome, really. It's just, I enjoy talking to some people, and the people I enjoy talking to, I bring in the phone. I'm like, hey, come chat with me. Let's enjoy it. Let's have a time together. So yeah, that's everything. Next time we'll be talking about something. Let's see. Oh, yeah. So we're going to do the veterans panel for Mask Off on Friday, but before that, for geopolitics, we're going to be talking about the end of liberalism. And we're going to be asking the question, is the age of liberalism about to come to an end? That's going to be a really big episode. I need to promo it a little bit. But yeah, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you all enjoy yourselves, and we'll catch you next time. Have a good one, guys.